Hello, friends. Welcome to the Nexus podcast. I'm your host, James Dice. Each week, I fire questions at the leaders of the smart buildings industry to try to figure out where we're headed and how we can get there faster without all the marketing fluff. I'm pushing my learning to the limit, and I'm so glad to have you here following along. Today's broadcast is titled Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Today in the Smart Buildings Industry. We chose the word today because we want this to be a kicking off point for an ongoing conversation and actions we can all take moving forward. I believe this topic is just as important as the technical topics that we usually cover here at Nexus, like indoor air quality, energy management, integration, ontologies. In fact, I think as we'll explore today, the technical and the social topics are inextricably intertwined. You can't pull them apart in reality. So with that, I want to pass it over to our moderator today, Mandi Wedin. Mandi is founder and CEO of Feroce Real Estate Advisors, where she advises forward-thinking real estate companies on positioning their real estate teams to succeed during times of disruption. And we're certainly in one of those times today. So thank you, Mandi, for hosting us today, and take it away.
Thank you, James. Thanks for providing the space and the time for this conversation. And I am very happy to be joined by a really great group of people who are going to share their experience and their learning with us. Our panel is here to teach and to learn, so please share, like James said, in the chat and post your questions in the Q&A. So 3 panelists joining us. Tara Turk-Haynes, she's the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Talent Management at Leaf Group. Her role is to lead the DEI efforts both internally and externally to create a more equitable workplace. Welcome, Tara. And Louisa Dickens, Lou, from LMRE. She co-founded that organization where her team connects the brightest talent with the most innovative prop tech companies globally. Welcome, Lou. And Mike Bruman, the CEO of Avanti. He continues to build and lead a diverse team at Avanti who transforms buildings into smart and efficient environments where people want to work, to play, and to learn. Welcome, Mike. Okay, so we'll jump right in and talk about DEI in the smart buildings industry today. So when I talk about DEI, I talk about it from a place of widening our field of vision when we have multiple inputs, multiple viewpoints, multiple lived experiences. We have an opportunity to make better decisions because we see more. Our field of vision is opened. And DEI is a shorthand for talking about widening that field of vision. So let's start with our first question, which is, share your take on the status quo of DEI and smart buildings industry today. What's your honest take on where we're at? And I'm going to start with you, Mike, since you're smack in the middle of the industry.
Thanks so much. So I definitely think we can do more. This is an interesting conversation to me because hidden away in Avanti is AV and IT. So we've predominantly come out of those industries and then broadened into kind of wider building services. And these are very familiar conversations that were happening a good few years ago within CompTIA, which is the largest IT industry association that's dedicated to the channel. I think there's a multitude of factors within this. I think we don't have enough role models. I think we're going to need to try and find those role models within the industry. I think we've got more coming through, which is great, but also there's a good amount of work to do at kind of grassroots level as well, in terms of particularly within the education system and encouraging certainly more women, but also a broader range of ethnic groups to join the industry, because I think particularly building services engineering tends to be very male orientated and certainly very white. So I think, yeah, the current status against maybe some other much more diverse industries is less good. But I think also there's a lot of things that we could take away from good work that's been done in other industries in order to make a real difference to smart building industry and hopefully do it a lot quicker as well.
Thanks. Lou, do you want to share your perspective from the recruiting side, talent side?
Yeah, for sure. And I'd like to say thank you to you and James for having all of us on this webinar. So I guess from a recruitment standpoint, I agree with everything sort of Mike just said. There's a lot that needs to be done, obviously, behind the, I guess, how many, I guess, women and men are in it, when we look at sort of races, sexualities. But I guess at LMRE, for those who don't know, our job is basically to champion this space for people from all sorts of backgrounds, whether you're sort of degree educated, whether you're from, I don't know, just have a diploma, whatever it is, whether you're junior or senior, you could be, you know, just going out of college or slightly, I don't know, trying a new sort of career path. A big thing that needs to be done is basically on the education and make it seen as a lot more of a proper sort of career pathway. Lots of people don't know about the smart building space, and you can't tap into a diverse pool of talent until people actually know about it. And so what I'll be sort of talking about later is what needs to be done really at sort of the grassroots levels to do with telling people air quality, whether it's, you know, with different routes you can go to, and the importance of making a building safe and smart. I saw we were doing it, looking over some stats recently at LMRE, and I noticed there was a 10% increase in sort of DEI specialists across our sort of clients, particularly in this space, which is quite a lot. And we also saw 30% increases in the past 12 months of our clients looking for sort of blanket shortlists. So I guess CVs without any names in it, trying to make sure there's no biases. But despite those sort of improvements being made, and sort of like we sort of mentioned earlier, with the problems which this space is facing as it sort of grows very quickly, founders and owners, operators, you know, big companies, there's supply and demand. So often, even though they might want to have this, you know, say they want a diverse candidate pool, like I said earlier, it's just not there. And so compromises are made, and they will find a short-term solution, just find someone to sort of fill the gap. But then in the long term, you still don't have a diverse sort of senior management team or team in general. So throughout this webinar, I guess what I'll sort of be telling the audience is what we can do in terms of education, what we can do in terms of awareness, and what we can do in terms of marketing to try and sort of tackle DEI.
Excellent, thank you. And Tara, from your perspective, do you want to share about the status quo of DEI and what it's like to be a practitioner and leader in that space?
So many things. And what I want to say, first of all, is like diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't something that can be an add-on. Like it's not like this new part of your, you know, your business focus. It should be integrated into your business. And when you start talking about like how to attract different candidates, like the whole world is having a problem when it comes to finding great talent. This is not just specific to this instance. And so companies are now having to really adjust and realign. What are your core values, right? Like, do your core values align with your DEI efforts, your business practices? Like everything is literally connected. So to treat it separately, you will have a fractured result. And so a lot of companies not able to find the talent will discover that that's one of the reasons why. Retention is huge. You can attract someone, but will they stay there once they get to your organization? And do they feel welcome? Do they feel like they have a voice? Do they feel like they can contribute overall? These are the hurdles, because I think a lot of people, especially in homogenous spaces, have not had to think about what it's like for someone else who doesn't look like you to be in an industry. And so your training literally should not be a biased training where it's like one-off. Okay, we did this like sexual harassment training or whatever, and we're good to go. You're constantly having to reevaluate how you've walked through your life with whatever privilege you have, whatever that might be. And so looking at it from what person didn't have that privilege, how did I get here, and how was I able to, you know, achieve the goals that I have based off of what privileges I have. And so whether that's you belong to a golf club, right? Like, is your golf club inclusive? Do they allow women? Do they allow people of underrepresented backgrounds? Like, really, where do you get your talent? And are your eyes open enough to be able to look at people who are second career, right? Like second careers are really huge right now across the board. Are you requiring degrees for your roles? Plenty of people, amazing people, have no degrees and they're super successful. I used to work at a startup that got acquired by Cisco for cloud data management. And one of them literally never graduated from college. He was a Yahoo salesman, and he basically created this multi-million-dollar business, and here we are. So what biases do you have that are preventing the people that you think will make your business much more profitable and creative and innovative? And the last part I'll say is those people are then going to connect you to a level of your business that you may not have, known before. There's a great IBM study where IBM was one of the the forerunners of DEI, and they basically implemented a DEI program in the 90s that allowed them to connect to underrepresented communities. They increased their business model. The people wanted to buy from salesmen who looked like them or could identify culturally with what their background was. So you can't lose in this situation. It's just going to be super challenging for you to realize how much you've walked around with preconceived notions that are preventing you from being successful.
Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about the perception of the value of diversity, because perception is reality, and that impact on the future of our industry, the smart building industry, the commercial real estate industry. And I say this from a place of being in commercial real estate my entire career, sticking it through and watching the evolution and the changes and the forces that come from demographics and other things impacting the ability of real estate to stay relevant and meaningful in people's lives. So how do we connect the value of diversity, the future of our industry, and continue to do great things? So I'm going to start with you, Lou, on this one to get your take.
I thought we were going to be talking more specifically about sort of the smart building space. And I think the perception, we don't quite know sort of what it is. I think everyone knows, everyone's trying to learn from other industries of the sort of importance at every single level or stakeholder level within a business to ensure it's sort of implemented throughout the company, whether it's sort of the employee level, the management level, the sort of company, it can reap sort of benefits of whether it's sort of employee engagement, employee satisfaction. I read like a McKinsey report the other day, and it said companies that exhibit gender and ethnic diversity are 15 to 35% more likely to outperform sort of less diverse peers. And also, and the same study found that organizations with more racial and gender diversity bring more sales revenue, more customers, and a higher profits. So for me, that's like a no-brainer, saying, look, there's proof from sort of other industries that where the real estate world can sort of learn from. And I mentioned earlier about this sort of increase in DEI specialists being hired by these corporates, whether it's say Cushman and Wakefield. They obviously have Adam Stanley, who's there at CIO, who's doing brilliant things and implementing so many awesome strategies and innovation managers. But even though these DEI specialists are sort of trying to change the perception of the wider business, you need more than a couple of people in that team for the larger companies. You need to have like sort of diversity sort of and inclusion champions also at sort of the more sort of junior level. So I think perception will change over time. I think some big hires are being made at the moment, but also lots of these companies haven't yet put the budget. Well, they are putting the budget in place, but haven't budgeted yet to ensure this change of perception actually happens. So I think it's difficult to say. I think it will change over the next sort of 3 to 5 years, but we have a long way to go, but moves are being made. That's just sort of a very sort of basic thing, which I've seen from a hiring standpoint.
And Tara, how has this worked, and where have you seen it in other industries? And do you have any examples that you would be willing to share?
I mean, I think what's amazing is that not compartmentalizing or segmenting industries at this point. We're all going through the same pain points. Everyone wants to figure out how best to get the best talent to make their business impactful. So across the board, literally you have, like, rest assured, you are not the only ones in this industry who are having this pain point. But what you really also kind of need to focus on is, like, people want to do the right thing, but they're paralyzed with what that right thing is. Like, how does that right thing exist? And one of the things I think is, you have to do something simultaneously. If you're going to recruit for underrepresented talent, which means going out there and meeting them where they are, right? Lou spoke to this a little bit about education, about like reaching out to, alumni groups, or are there, going to college fairs, mentoring, doing mock interviews, sponsoring, scholarships. My husband is in the building industry, and, he is involved in IFMA's, they have a mentorship program for young people entering entering the facilities management space. So like, do you have people there who are willing to reach back? And are you not just waiting for that talent to come to you, because you will be waiting a long time? One of the other things I'll say is training is so very important. Put some money into your resources to be able to train your people so that you're building an inclusive environment. And it's not just the people at the top, it's also your frontline managers, because they're the ones who do day-to-day interaction with your people. I saw some study that said like 61% of people were happy when, you know, they had their leaders doing DEI training. 81% were much more happy because their leaders and their direct managers were making some kind of effect to them as well. Those people who deal with the day-to-day are the ones that you really kind of have to empower and be able to operate on your behalf, so that you're keeping those people and they feel like they're contributing overall to the goals and the values that you have for your organization. So this is happening across the board. Like, people are literally trying to figure out what their roadmap is going to be. But I would say plan for longevity. I say DEI is a journey and not a destination. We're always going to be doing this. Get comfortable in being continuous in your practices. Like, this is not going to be like, okay, we got our degree, check, done. Okay, we're all inclusive now. Yay. You have hundreds of years of systemic racism and other biases that you're overcoming. It's not going to happen in like 2 years. It just won't.
Yeah, I love it. It is a journey. So Mike, you want to share about some of the DEI as a mindset and a practice that you see in your team and in the industry?
I can certainly try. So I think from the industry perspective, I think we need to bear in mind that all people use buildings, right? So we need to make sure that in terms of, from a smart building perspective, the technology that's going into those buildings helps everyone. So, and that can be across the board, from kind of physical disability. We actually had an example in a member of our team who was colorblind, and one of our designers put an interface together, and actually they found it really difficult to look at the contrast on it. Really minor examples, but in terms of how it plays out in the building, its accessibility and all of those other bits and pieces, this is where it really kind of contributes to that end result, in that as soon as you have internal lenses who understand the potential problems, whether that's from a systemic perspective or from a disability perspective, actually you can start working that into the delivery and making that difference kind of out in the field. In terms of kind of how it shows up for us and what we've been doing about it, I think we made a really conscious effort about probably 6 or 7 years ago now, where I read the Jim Collins book, Good to Great, talks a lot about kind of defining values within your company, and a really amazing experience from a couple of different perspectives. I think we'd got to a point where we'd grown to about 20 people. We were starting to kind of having to implement things like policy and procedure, making sure that people understood those and that kind of thing. We found ourselves really kind of starting to cater for this lowest common denominator of people that hadn't been through any values assessment. So we defined our 5 values. We have mastery, which is kind of being as good as you can be; integrity, making sure that we're being real with people, we're always kind of speaking the truth and have everyone's interests at heart; discovery, no stupid questions. We want people to turn up, be curious, and in this industry, it's absolutely essential that people can learn quickly and kind of apply that knowledge. We then have care, and that's looking after people internally, but also looking after our clients; and fun, because, well, next to sleeping, work's pretty much the longest thing that you're going to do, and we want people to have as good a time as possible. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean it's a permanent party at Vanti, but we do want people to have a good time whilst they're here. And I think in starting to do that values assessment work and really starting to work on our culture, it really set the foundation and started unlocking a number of things that we could do in terms of our recruitment process, because as people have already kind of mentioned and talked about, we knew that there would be great people out in the world that didn't hold a degree. And actually, so we started shifting some of our questions to our process to be things like, do you have a home lab? Do you play with technology in your own time? Because actually, we knew if people were doing that actually they would be kind of vivacious learners, and they would want to apply themselves, and they probably could skill up quickly because they were used to kind of tinkering around and things. And I think it's really, Tara, I echo your point entirely that this isn't a destination. I think I'm really conscious that we still have loads of things that we could be doing, and also there are constraints in terms of time and money, sadly, in terms of how much we can do with it. But also really have experienced, the only word I can kind of bring to mind right now is a real kind of blossoming in this, in that early on, when we had our COO join us shortly after we'd done that values assessment, we had some kind of really furious arguments around positive discrimination, how we should and shouldn't handle things through the hiring process, that actually it wasn't necessarily about bringing people in with skill, that actually, again, to Tara's point, in terms of bringing people in who demonstrated really great values and could get on board with that learning attitude, that actually it was then incumbent on us to be able to skill those people up and support them on their journey. And then I think a lot later, as we finally got to the point now of, in terms of our kind of recruitment pipeline and implementing the new tool that we've used, we can start putting metrics now on making sure that we are quite balanced. So we are just shy of the point of 50-50 in terms of men and women into our recruitment pipeline, which is like completely different to where we were kind of 4 or 5 years ago, where it was almost broadly 100% male. We know that within that, we still have a lot of work to do on bringing women into technical roles. And that is something where, again, we're looking at the kind of values assessment first, and then actually putting the time and effort into people who want to kind of grow with us. And then I think the Black Lives Matter movement really kind of triggered things inside of Vanti, and actually led us to have conversations with Black colleagues that we have today, but also us setting up a tackling racism group who meet every 2 weeks to look at how do we create kind of safe and equitable spaces for people to be in. And again, in terms of looking at that privilege that people may not understand, in terms of that they are kind of born into and defaulted into and have had no reason to kind of consider and think about this stuff. Really kind of helping people to understand those unconscious biases, and also now moving towards kind of generalized unconscious bias training for all members of the team. So not perfect, but certainly have some really great examples of people where very different lenses on the world has led to the best outcome in terms of Vanti as an organization, but also then the best outcome for our clients.
Thank you. So let's talk about the talent war, the process of hiring and building diverse teams. Lou, you already referenced it's a supply and demand challenge, right? I see it as also a chicken and egg challenge, right? If you don't have a team that appeals to diverse candidates, you're going to have a really hard time hiring diverse candidates or even having access to talk to them. So I'll start with you, Lou. Share a little bit about what you're specifically seeing, challenges, lessons learned, and obstacles.
Yeah, for sure. Where do I begin? This is the juicy stuff. Like, I guess, like everyone on the panel has said today, hiring diverse teams in every sort of industry is sort of extremely difficult, and it takes a hell of a long time. But I think especially for like the smart buildings industry, which is obviously a STEM industry, and that makes it even more challenging. And it's probably one of the fastest growing sort of fields, plenty of sort of opportunities, but still it's like probably one of the most undiverse ones. So I guess women, Black people and Hispanic people are super underrepresented. So you need to sort of work out where is this sort of lack of supply coming from? So like I mentioned earlier, women are often in school outperform men, but never think to sort of take it on. And just in general, lots of children don't know of the sort of career pathway. So well, first of all, we go back to start talking about importance of smart buildings, importance of indoor air quality, reduce CO2 footprint, more talk about it from a younger age, not university, because that's when all the students start looking at consultancy, finance, whatever it is. But then if you look at, say Black and Hispanic research, they are often ones who have not as many go to the universities, but in the smart building space, there's this perceived barrier that you have to enter the STEM workforce, you need to have an engineering degree or computer science degree. That's so not true. There's the control technicians roles, there's installation managers, there's service technicians, integrators, just that has like engineering or technician in the job title does not mean you have to go to like university. And so I think we need to do basically a lot more into telling people, whether it's sort of junior people to more people who say at 30 or 35 who are looking for a new sort of career change, about what's out there in the world. And it doesn't matter where you sort of come from. So many of these jobs, and any of the audience listening in who runs one of these companies, so much of it's on the job training. And you just have to have, a passion for it. You have to be able to be smart, be able to pick up sort of new skills. But there's so much stuff out there. And then in terms of, say, the marketing side, I saw an advert by the Wellbeing Institute, and it had like loads of celebrities like Jennifer Lopez, Lady Gaga, talking about the importance of making wellbeing smart and like getting, everyone's talking about getting back to work, and it talks about the importance of where it's an office, a studio, residential building, a cinema, and about why people want to get back to that. But if you have like all these, say, celebrities talking about it and the importance of our buildings, other people, whether it's, say, students, kids, whatever it is, will say, oh my God, I just saw so-and-so talk about it. Maybe that is important. Maybe that is an exciting route to sort of go down. Then when you mentioned earlier about making a company attractive for people to go to. So that's important. It's about getting the DEI right, the first thing, because more research which we've done from LMRE, we've asked so many of our female candidates, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it was something like 90% said if there was like a senior management team that was diverse and had like equal male and female heads, different races, I think 90% said, yeah, they'd find it a lot more attractive. And I think it's a lot more for women candidates coming to this market, which is obviously the hardest sort of people to recruit into this market. So that is just so important to get it right. And I think I don't think having two heads of business who are male I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But if you're talking about the long term, about attracting and different sort of mindsets, helping everyone to innovate and sort of grow together, it is very important. I do think outside of it, and how can you like spread the word, and outside of, really cool marketing video messages, like I said, to do with the wellbeing one, the stuff which, James does a fabulous job at Nexus about sort of spreading the word. There's the Smart Buildings Academy. It's just about getting everyone talking about how it is accessible and how it is inclusive and everything like that. And then it's, I guess rather than everyone sort of pushing it off to the heads of diversity or the senior management, and we all mentioned earlier, like everyone's got a part to play in this, whether it's like me as a recruiter, whether it's as you're as a sort of consultant, and it's talking about it openly. But I think those are a few places which we can start, but it's just so important for any business to get it right early, even if they don't think it's high on the agenda, because they can't see the quick returns from it. Like it's a long-term play which will generate your business a lot, and the people a lot more sort of happiness. And obviously the business owner will want to make profit in the long run, but they've got to think of the whole picture and all the people that come into it. So that's a little bit about what I've seen. I don't know if you have any other questions you'd like me to go into.
That's good.
Hey guys, just another quick note from our sponsor, Nexus Labs, and then we'll get back to the show. This episode is brought to you by Nexus Foundations, our introductory course on the smart buildings industry. If you're new to the industry, this course is for you. If you're an industry vet but want to understand how technology is changing things, this course is also for you. The alumni are raving about the content, which they say pulls it all together, and they also loved getting to meet the other students on the weekly Zoom calls and in the private chat room. You can find out more about the course at courses.nexuslabs.online. All right, back to the interview.
I want to turn to Mike and talk about lessons learned from this, what you're willing to share, and how you are translating that lessons learned into iterating and advancing the mission.
Yeah. So I think you made some really great points there. I think it's important to recognize that from a kind of age 13 is really the last place that you're going to start reaching young people as they start to kind of move out into other fields. So from a STEM perspective and making that exciting, that's important. I think would definitely kind of build on Lou's comments there. Like, smart buildings, they don't have to be huge assets, but they often are larger buildings at the moment. There are some really, exciting demonstrable results and also really practical things that as kind of technologists, we can take along and have people kind of get really tactile and hands-on with, right? I think we're not in a ethereal industry of, creating virtual tokens or assets or other things that might be very difficult to comprehend. Like these are big things that people see every day. They live in one, they go to work in one, they go to school in one. It's about kind of bringing it to life and really making it relevant. I think in terms of lessons learned, the focus on the value set, a passion for what we do. Skills can come later. You train for skill, you definitely can't train for kind of passion and values. They are relatively intrinsic, or they can change over the longer term. And I think it is about getting into the community. It's about doing things at grassroots level. My hope is that there isn't anyone from Commentary on this call, but From one of the things that I got frustrated with being on the exec counselling committee was that there was a real view for kind of global initiatives and global change. And my point was always like, let's do it at grassroots, let's make sure it works, and then let's scale it up into something else. And I think it works the same, for all kind of founders, business owners, and whatever else, senior leaders on this call. It is about doing those small things first, and as you say, kind of iterating and building over time. It's the only way that it works. I think things that we've done that have worked very well: hosting work experience folks, doing outreach into schools, so going and giving talks, bringing it to life, make it applicable to subject areas like, why bother doing maths? Well, actually, here's how it applies in this world, and all that kind of stuff. And one of the best things that we ever did was, and something that we absolutely need to restart now we're kind of post-pandemic and we've got restrictions lifted, is we ran an initiative with a local business called Rebel Makers, which was all about bringing people into the office once a month. We would open the doors, we would clear out the office space upstairs where we have all our hot desks, and we would have a load of Raspberry Pis, sensors, kind of electronic kits and that kind of stuff. And we would just encourage people to come in and join us. And actually, whilst it wasn't the initial ambition, we have one of our most skilled electrical engineers came through that route. And we also have a software developer who joined us yesterday, who was actually an A-level student, so kind of college kind of age, who did go off to university, came back and worked here every summer whilst he was at university, and then has joined us now as a full-time employee. So I think would entirely echo this isn't about getting a badge and then expecting immediate results tomorrow. It's a really long-term play, but actually, if you are of a kind of human mindset, you do recognize the privilege that you have. Actually, the effort in terms of giving up a Saturday morning once a month is entirely required if we're going to see the change that should happen within this industry.
Excellent. I want to come to one of your Rebel Makers session and play with the tech, the toys, but the tech.
You're very welcome anytime.
Awesome. Okay. So Tara, I'd love to hear from you about what you do, what your team does at Leaf Group. I really appreciate your context of we're not in this alone. Everyone is experiencing this, but I'd love to learn from you about what you're doing, where you've seen progress and where you've iterated and learned.
Yeah, so for those not familiar, Leaf Group is the parent company to lifestyle categories. So we own media as well as e-commerce brands like Live Strong, Well and Good, which is super popular, and Saatchi and Society6. So really in the digital media space. And my role, I've always been in talent for over 15 years. And my DEI role came to after the murder of George Floyd, and our company really being in a place like many others where we're just like, where are we in this place and how did we get here? A lot of people have no ideas. For some people, it felt like a very sharp turn around a corner. And for some of us, we'd be like, hello, we've been trying to tell you for a little bit. And we have that mix of people within our organization. And so really I stepped in to start doing things like putting together terminologies in terms of like LGBTQ+ or underrepresented talent, why it's, not wonderful to hear someone say, I really don't see color. Like there's all these different things about like what our intentions are versus like what we actually land. And my approach to the role was, we don't all share the same education. We don't all come from the same area background. What was taught to me as a Black girl in Detroit, Michigan is not going to be the same as what Lou and Mike get. And that's fine. But how are we going to be now in this workplace together to fill in the gaps of what I learned, what you learned, what's true, what's not true, what helps us communicate better, what helps us build businesses better? How can we just fill in those gaps and be more inclusive to one another? Some of the things that we did, we devoted a whole intranet page to our DEI efforts. So we have terminologies, we have, articles for managers. We did some panels. We did a talk back for the 13th documentary, which was really powerful for people for Black History Month. We've had model minority panels. We had Dr. Jelani Cobb, who's on popular MSNBC, as well as a professor, do a chat with our CEO about how do we get here. Jelani is an incredible historian as well as a journalist. So context was super helpful for a lot of people. But the more conversations we were having, the more people started to feel like, oh, I can contribute to this. Now, in terms of data, what we also rolled out was a continuous micro-learning platform that everyone is expected to participate in. It's all about diversity, equity, inclusion, bias. You learn a lot. There are paths that get released every Tuesday, and they're micro, so it's like 8 minutes. If you don't have 8 minutes in your week, we have to have another conversation, right? And so for us, from the HR perspective, on the back end, we're also able to then measure sentiment by manager. So are we saying, like, these managers actually, their teams don't necessarily feel like they feel super inclusive, or this manager is actually knocking it out of the park in terms of making their teams feel inclusive. That way we can structure what training we need for who, right? So it allows us to be very strategic in what we're trying to do. And then lastly, I'll say getting your people involved. Our ERGs have increased, our employee resource groups have increased. We've had 2 start this year. I also implemented a DEI council that has reps from each of our brands or departments talk about what's happening within their department or their brand. How can I support from a corporate level? What kinds of things can we do? Right now, my DEI council, so proud of them, came up with ideating a mentorship program. You don't all have to, like, and senior leaders and executives don't have to come up with absolutely everything. You can totally crowdsource some of your questions. It is totally okay to say to your team, I have no idea how we're going to do this, but help me figure it out. And lastly, I will say the most important thing is figure out your why. Why are you doing this? Because you know what? Your why is going to be your theme throughout what you're doing. And if it's a little shaky, so are your resources and so are your results. But if it's really strong, if you really say, I really am committed to changing this industry, changing my business, I want this to be something that, you know, will be attractive to other people. Get your corp comms team involved, hit social media, tell people what it's like to work in your environment. You know, Mike has a great idea, but also the kids are on TikTok, Snapchat, like Twitter, hashtags. Learn all of these things. Don't sit back and be like, oh, I can't, you know, I remember phone books. I can't do this. You have to figure out or hire somebody to do it so they can tell your story. Your employer brand is so very important. You're probably doing a lot of great things. Sit down and figure out what those things are, capitalize on them, and then figure out what other great things you can do.
Awesome. Okay, so let's move to the action phase. Let's talk about takeaways, next steps, and action items that we can share with the listeners of the live session here and the future listeners of the recording. So, Mike, talk to me about what action items and takeaways that maybe you took from this and what you would share with the listeners.
Sure. So I think in terms of takeaways, I definitely think we've got a bit more to do about making it really exciting. I think that's really cool. And I think actually, Tara, thanks for the tip on IBM, because I'm going to go and have a read up on that a bit later as well. And also, actually, I think one thing that we have focused on a lot is the attraction phase. And actually, I think we do need to switch now to much more of a retention and checking in and making sure that sentiment is good. We have just done a survey to look at people's protected characteristics and what that looks like across the business. But yeah, I think we definitely need to shift into checking that sentiment and making sure that things are well structured. In terms of advice to the audience, I think it's really just, well, listen to Tara in terms of why. And I think if you're sat there kind of, I'm okay with the status quo, I don't have to do anything, well, then this probably isn't for you. But I do think it is going to get to a point, this does make, there will be a tipping point where the demonstrable results across lots of organizations will really start to come to the fore. So I wouldn't advocate for doing this out of a fear of being left behind, because I don't think it would be genuine or authentic. But I think if you do believe and have been listening to any recent events, that there is a lot of injustice in the world, that there is a lot of inequality, equity, and justice gaps to close all over the place, that really the next step is do something. And even if that is to just start engaging in the community, understand what your community looks like. We're still very cognizant that actually in Birmingham, where we're kind of shifting to actually white people being in more of a minority, that as a company, we do not represent the community which surrounds us every day, right? And that's something that we need to get addressed. And then I think take a look at hiring, right? Because that is the place to start. When new people are coming into the organization, look at the funnel, make sure you do positively promote it to underrepresented groups, make sure that you are bringing people into that process that may not have been in it before. And also, I think, not that it directly relates, but I think it does really help. Even if you go through that values definition process, read the book from Jim. There's a one-pager out on the internet. Talk about your Mars team. You'd put in a rocket as 5 people, send them off to another planet and re-establish your company culture, because actually that has made a really great difference here. And I think it does give us that constant reference, even just in little ways. We have them as each of our values as emojis in our real-time chat tool called Slack. So we can recognize people instantly when they're demonstrating those values and really kind of reinforce them on the day-to-day. My overriding message is, don't sit on your hands. Don't think everyone else is going to do it. Certainly don't think other people are going to go and do it for you. Get out and do something.
Awesome. Tara, you already shared a lot of great ideas, and I love your energy around this. Mike, I see you noticed it too about make it fun. It's energetic. So what would you share as action items, lessons learned? Everybody's on their own journey. Some people are at the starting line. Some people are further along. What would you share?
I will say a couple things. One, be proactive, right? Because right now we are talking about like underrepresented talent as it relates to gender and race, but it also includes so many other things. There are 34 categories of diversity. And so that could mean like disability, that could mean, mental and physical. Like there are all these different things that you can be proactive about. If you're saying you have an inclusive environment, you mean you welcome all of those people. So for your hiring practices, do you have like ADHD, or can you help people who may not be able to hear effectively? What kinds of questions are you asking? And, are there biases in those kinds of questions? Really get somebody to deep dive into your systems. If you don't know that, you can hire people to do that for you. And it's a really low lift to make sure that you are being welcoming. I will also say, don't do just like Mike said, don't do anything. Don't let your fear paralyze you. Be able to be open and vulnerable. People love vulnerable leadership. I will say, this is an industry, because, by marriage, I know some of it, and like facilities management. My husband, as a Black man, has terrible stories about showing up at job interviews because he has a name that doesn't necessarily sound Black, whatever that means. And then he shows up and they're like, oh, wait, that's not who I thought this was. And so the job doesn't go well. Eliminate the people on your team who are going to be perpetuating those kinds of attitudes, and really clean house and make sure that you have people who are really on the right track for you. Don't also ask your underrepresented talent to educate you. That's not helpful. Really can be committed to finding resources. There's so many courses out there. There are so many people who will come into your organization, talk to you about it. Pay those people to tell you and educate yourself. Don't rely on your team to do the lift for you, and make it so that they're responsible for your own education. We are all trying to make an impact together. One of the things I like to say is an Octavia Butler quote, everything that you touch impacts, the world. You change everything you touch. And so really being mindful of that. It's a huge responsibility to be a great human being in this world. And so I feel like we can all do it. We just need to make sure we're being a lot more mindful.
Thank you. Okay. Lou, where have you seen companies take action? What would you share with people for takeaways? And I'm going to follow this up, heads up to the panelists. I'm going to ask you these questions again and take it from the mind point of one of the team members who's not a manager. Yes, they can be a leader from any seat, but they don't have a leadership title. And what advice would you give them?
Okay, well, I'll sort of start with sort of a few takeaways and building on Mike and Tara's points. What I've seen in terms of my clients is, Tara mentioned about sort of being proactive, and also meant about sort of almost outsourcing and paying people to help me sort of tackle this problem, the challenge of DEI. I think my clients have been successful in scaling and building these teams. And they have budgeted for it, and they have properly invested in senior management saying, right, this is what I'm going to do. This is the budget for the year, and this is what our metrics or targets that we want to achieve throughout the business. So I think it's very important for stakeholders, people in the industry, to start doing this and budgeting for it earlier than they have been. And as we've all alluded to, it takes bloody forever. So it's investing earlier. It's having all senior management sending the message to the wider business, so change actually starts to happen. It's going back to the diversity problem. It's getting people in it at the grassroots level, which Mike spoke about earlier, is talking about it being a proper career pathway, all the huge earning potential, but also getting rid of these perceived barriers of you have to be degree educated, which we all spoke about earlier. There's so many different sort of pathways and opportunities. But then also, I think after we've, done all that, we've done the investment, we've hired these DEI sort of specialists, culture's going well, people feeling included. The next real challenge which businesses need to get right, and I'm speaking on behalf of some of the corporates that I work with, they need to actually make sure consistent training's happening, because it's so difficult when you have so many different moving parts of business. And we all spoke about that, to make sure they're all communicating and all integrating with each other, because that's how innovation is going to happen. That's how businesses are going to sort of grow and maintain their current sort of talent pool. So obviously it's about getting more people in, but it's looking after everyone and making sure they're all communicating. So that's like where I've seen most success stories. But that also comes from another big budget about training and investing into your current team. So a lot of this sounds like it's revolving around education and like investment in culture. And yeah, it's down to basically everyone in this industry to be sort of championing it as well and openly speaking about it. Mike mentioned earlier, after sort of Black Lives Matter movement, that's when they sort of started addressing it. But it's been consistently addressing it. It's not just one movement that's just happened. We should all continually sort of speak about DEI and what we can sort of do, and then actioning it.
Any specifics you would share with maybe the 2 years in to the industry, first job person who has passion or ideas around this and wants to figure out how they can make an impact?
Actually, I spoke to Adam Stanley, and this is on a podcast I did with him on literally this topic. Adam Stanley is like Christian Wakefield, I'm sure lots of people know about him. And I do struggle in some of my roles in hiring for diverse teams. My clients ask for diverse shortlist, and that's what we do our best to. But I was speaking to him, I was like, I'm struggling to get a diverse pool for this role. What can I do? And he was like, what's cool, it's you need to tap into obviously different talent pools, and you have the problem of, the 1 degree of separation. If you're not part of a different demographic or something, it's really hard to actually engage with them. But we spoke about working with sort of different sort of associations and not just leaning on one person in your business. It's about everyone trying to tap into different communities, different sort of people. So yeah, I think it's just talking to everyone, being a lot more sort of open-minded. I actually did a post yesterday on LinkedIn to get people's personal experiences of this, and lots of people asked me not to actually mention their names. So unfortunately, I can't give a sort of exact case study, which I was kind of hoping I could do for you guys. So sorry.
Well, at least people are sharing, even if it's sharing one-offs and privately.
Yeah,
still sharing. Okay. Tara, how about you? How do you talk to one of your newer team members or younger team members, or someone who doesn't feel like they yet have a way to make an impact?
Well, I will say that everybody has a way to make an impact. And like, I will say this current workforce, if you're starting to dive into it, super motivated, really want to know what you're doing as a company so that they can then sort of figure out where they can contribute. I talk to tons of people who reach out to me all the time. And it's oddly enough in the facility space where people are like, they're new to this space. They want to make a change. Some of the things I've heard, they've started book clubs within their organization. Can we talk about some of the books that are popular, how to be anti-racist? Like, there are so many great books that you can have conversations about. There are people who are starting employee resource groups. I believe those employee led. So encouraging people to participate in those. I talk to every new hire that we have about DEI and engagement 4 weeks in. So having somebody that reaches out to them from the executive level or managerial level to see what their interests are and how can you best help them? Can you be a mentor, a sponsor? You don't have to have the answers for them, but if they say like, hey, look, it would be really great if we started this program, be the person that can help them facilitate that, removing barriers and challenges, allowing them to know that their ideas will contribute overall. So, you don't have to design what that looks like. You just have to give people the space to be able to create that impact. So eliminating all of your levels of like, no's, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of people come into an organization, you hear no. That's going to be demotivating. And I'm going to tell you, in this industry where people are literally really having inward conversations about, do I need to be in this organization? Is it right for me? Career hoppers are no longer a negative thing right now, because a lot of candidates, a lot of employees are saying, after this pandemic, after everything that's happened, social justice, everything, my why has to make sense, and I want to be in an environment that allows me to do that. So be that company or be that environment that allows them to say, like, I can make an impact here.
Excellent. Okay. So from the engineer's perspective, take yourself back to the Wayback Machine when you were a project leader and you didn't manage anyone and you want to figure out how to make an impact. What would you say, Mike?
So I think first and foremost, it's about understanding yourself. I think there's a lot to be said from things coming from within. So I think, understand who you are, understand what privilege you hold, understand and explore, do you know everything about yourself? And that also takes time, right? That's not an immediate thing. I think from a very kind of personal perspective, I would encourage people to get into as much of this and consume as much content as possible, particularly on offer from your company. For me personally, we had a couple of people here who are neurodivergent. We arranged some autism training for the entire business. I sat in that training in front of a set of slides and went, I do that. Oh yeah, and that happens to me. Oh yeah, and that happens too. And that actually led to my later diagnosis of Asperger's, which has been fascinating for me in terms of understanding a lot of key things that have happened through my life and why they've happened in particular ways and how they felt at the time. But I do also feel as though that's really empowered me to be a better ally for people who are not neurotypical in our business, and also understand to, as far as an extent I can, in terms of what that means to not be kind of in the typical and normal club for other people who may be people of colour or different genders. And then I think it is about kind of being curious, asking questions, asking why things are done in particular ways, and how that might be inclusive or exclusive to particular demographics. And I think the very least that people can do, however junior they are, is contribute to making spaces safe and be an ally to others in the organisation. I think that's super important and is something that anyone can get on board with tomorrow, or even today, being as it's the morning for some people.
There you go. Okay, excellent. Well, we save time purposefully for question and answer session. So if people in the audience have questions that they want these experts to share guidance on, please put them in the Q&A session. We have one that I'll start off with. And Lou, it ties back to one of your earlier comments about the challenge of getting women to participate in the industry and what we know are known barriers and how we're overcoming that. Can we talk specifically about the construction technology, the IoT, building automation, and where you're seeing women join the ranks of those teams, how it's been successful? We don't need a secret sauce because there is no secret sauce, but
yeah. I think where there's been positives and negatives of it, obviously the Contech IoT industry is very sort of male dominated. Where I've seen success stories is when women have seen the huge potential sort of grow, because there's actually not been enough women in the business. They're like, right, this is my opportunity to sort of share, sort of implement sort of new strategies, really to have like a lot more sort of autonomy and changing the sort of culture and promoting and more of a diverse workforce. And they've seen that opportunity, but they're obviously quite strong-willed women who then gone into it. I've had a lot of candidates not take jobs despite really liking the product or being excited about the space because of the pure sort of male structure there is there. So then that goes down to, if I can give any bits of advice if you're trying to attract women, is either giving them, and I think Tara, you spoke about this earlier, is giving them like a reason, like, why would you want to join our business? The exciting part of it, and making it a lot more sort of appealing, giving people like ownership, say you'll own this, you'll do that. But otherwise, if you don't have that sort of reason to sort of entice them, as great as your product could be or what you're trying to create, will never be sort of that exciting. So you've got to really sort of give something else to sell other than just sort of the job, because a lot of millennials and younger candidates are not just will not just join the job for the 9 to 6 sort of roles. They want to do something else. They want to put the culture, they want these other sort of responsibilities which are now available within a career.
Thanks. Okay, Mike or Tara, do you have anything you want to share? Any experiences or anecdotes or advice?
I mean, I'll say also, like, when you consider the underrepresented talent group that you're talking about, you have to consider like all of the things that they deal with. And we're talking about caregiving status, we're talking about like other kinds of opportunities. Is your company set up to support that, right? Like, women disproportionately were affected by the pandemic when we talk about economics. If you look at any of the McKinsey studies, especially the women in workplace 2020 study, which, you know, was devastating for a lot of people, they were literally saying there are some women who are not coming back, right? How can you make it appealing for them to do that? And Black women were extraordinarily impacted by the pandemic, where the jobs that they were doing completely eliminated. A lot of those were labor jobs, blue collar jobs. If you're trying to find some of those people to meet those kinds of jobs, what kind of upskilling can you do? Someone asked, I think in the question, look at your job description, what's needs versus wants, right? Like, are you looking for the unicorn, or are you looking for somebody who has potential, you can grow? When they grow within your organization, you create loyalty, you create this level of, you know, support in a way that allows them to feel like there is growth. I think the Monster recruiting report just came out, and they were saying 22% of the people who are leaving the workplace today, it's because they felt like there was no growth. Like, there was an extraordinary percentage where they said there are some people who are literally looking for jobs all the time. So, you know, once you hire the people, you have to figure out how to keep them and make them feel like secure that they're going to be in an organization that supports them, allows them to have opportunities for growth. So creating those environments, I think, is going to be super important.
I'll just build on that, I guess. And so I think the other thing that's sprung to mind whilst both Lynn and Tara are talking there is, think about, in terms of, again, going back to that, steps that we can take, think about the kind of promote from within as well, right? It might be that we have people joining us in particular roles that actually, once they're within the organization, demonstrate and show interest and capability in other areas. So it's not just necessarily about as people cross the threshold, it's then about how can we develop people internally. I think, to Tara's point on creating that environment, that's the essential part, right? Because if you've got people that want to stay within the organization, they can see progression, they can see that people can move around, actually that sends more positive messages out. And I'm sure Ria won't mind me mentioning her on this panel, but I think she's probably our best example as someone who actually started working with us as a contractor doing marketing. She then moved in-house doing marketing. We then advertised a team integrator role for our service team who look after all of our managed service clients. And she was like, guys, I really think I can do that. Like, I've not got the technical capability, but everything else you're talking about in the job spec, I can totally knock this out of the park. And she did. And then just recently, we've moved her again into a role that is now entire business transformation. And her knowledge, capability, and skill that she's built through that makes her absolutely indispensable at Vanti, because actually she understands so many parts of the business. And whilst, yes, she doesn't have a technical degree, in terms of the impact and the difference that she makes within the organization, it's absolutely huge. And she is also that role model now for others. And we hold her up as an example all the time as what is possible within the organization. You don't have to come through technical routes. You can still have a huge impact and be doing a role that is largely technical.
Thanks for sharing that story. So I have another question from the audience, and this is about, some people see that the industry is, for the most part, sitting back and watching still, hasn't taken much action. But what we're talking about here is companies that have, and the next steps. So how does the mindset shift from being passive to active happen?
I'll say leadership starts. You have to have a CEO, a leader who's like, okay, this is our new world. And then it filters in from there. I'm not saying that CEO has to figure out what that actual structure looks like, but you have to be committed, because at the end of the day, any changes that you make as an organization are under that particular leader. So if you have a leader who is probably not willing or a little passive, either if there's no one there who can get them there, then it's going to stall. Like, you have to be able to have that. I think your second step is putting together a plan. What's your statement? Where would you like to go? Being very real about your demographics. Don't try to do a marketing statement that says, yay, we're almost like we're half women. Like, what are your real stats? Like, really put down, as and put them on your site. So many companies are doing that right now. If you look at Apple or BuzzFeed and all these other companies, they're just like, they might have a little marketing spin to it, but their data is really, it is what it is, right? And we hope to be able to be in an environment that will be more inclusive. We know we have a long way to go. However, here's where we are now. Come with us on this journey as we make this change. And then, put, when you have your why, put in structure to figure out how do you get to your goals, like put councils together, be able to like hold people accountable, maybe make sure you have checks and balances, have somebody who's looking at all parts of your business and making sure that your efforts are integrated. Like no stone should be unturned, because you're now looking at a new world where a lot of companies are doing that.
Yeah, I like to build on that. You can use say Cushman and Wakefield as like a case study example. So Adam Stanley, he now has put, so they have senior management on board with tackling sort of DEI. They've also then, so that's senior management, and now they sort of implemented and got diversity champions throughout sort of the junior levels of the business and throughout all the teams. And they've also they do like I think it's like certain events, they've got awards for it as well. So if you're doing something which is like enhancing that, the same way they do it for innovation as well. So it's sort of getting everyone to sort of work together with the same initiative and sort of motive, which is great. And that is a massive bloody business to create, to get everyone sort of thinking the same way. So yeah, I completely agree with what Tara said. It's senior management, but then it's like getting the wider business.
Okay. Other question that came in was about, we've been talking a lot about internal leaders and some about external, but what's the external? How do you communicate this as a benefit? What are the results for your clients, for your customers?
When you say that, do you mean the results for, say, if your business like selling a product, or like, what is that what you could mean? Or
well, one of my question, so Lindsay's asking specifically about communicating benefits of a product to clients, and we can talk about that. And then I'm also thinking through, how do you communicate how, because your company is bringing more diverse people to the table and building a better product, how do you take that and deliver that as, here's why you should hire us, because this is what we do?
Yeah, well, I was like reading a report, the same one sort of I mentioned earlier by McKinsey. If you have like a diverse sort of sales team, you're a lot more sort of understanding when you're sort of selling product to all sorts of different clients out there, and your sales and profits just go up. So if your client's looking at it from a profits lens, you do just want, obviously you want to be working with a happy team, but the client at the end of the day often just wants to see sort of what value they're getting out of whoever they're sort of working with. So there's so much data out there that proves a more diverse, inclusive workforce just generally breeds value.
Anybody else have thoughts on external marketing or communications?
Yeah, I think maybe, I'm not sure if I'm maybe taking this too literally or not, but I think the direct translation into some kind of return on investment metric, if that's your searching point, it's probably the wrong place to start. I think we need to go back to the kind of wider reasons and the whys for why we're doing this, which is lots of bad systemic stuff needs resolving. So I think if we're looking for, dollars and cents or pounds and pence in terms of a metric, please don't start there. I think in terms of the benefits, and we've touched on some of this already, but I think the lack of groupthink and the ability to see things and perceive things from lots of different lenses, it's been, again, in terms of that blossoming that I used earlier, sitting in sessions now with members of our team, particularly where we're solving problems, particularly when we're just working on design challenges, it is amazing to see the number of different perspectives that now have emerged because of the different people, different backgrounds and everything else that we have in the room. I'm not sure that necessarily translates to something that you could put on your marketing collateral, as we're going to come up with the best ideas. But I do think when people kind of engage with the team, they get a real sense of that kind of culture. And it's always amazing to get feedback from clients. So I think it's probably looking at it as after the fact in terms of how people engage, and then you're getting that feedback to go, actually working with this team was different. We really enjoyed this. Like, we did enjoy the different perspectives and focus. we could see ourselves within it. They're probably the outcomes that you want to be focused on. I think connecting this with financial metrics is, I'd probably check that at the door.
I totally agree with that, Mike. I think the question would be like, why would you want to stay stagnant? Like, do you want to be part of the world that's already changing around you? Like, hi, I would like to be part of 2021 and 2022 and beyond. So essentially, like, it's just asking, like, do you want to still stay archaic? And, why not talk to people or engage with businesses that reflect the world we actually live in rather than the world we probably curate ourselves? Like, at the end of the day, the reverse question is probably a lot more helpful to understand, like, do you want to work with the person who definitely is like, no, I like homogenous groups. Thank you. Thank you.
Nice. Yeah, when I talk about ROI, I talk about the financial metric, ROI, return on investment, and then bring a relevance lens to it. And that's the risk of ignoring. You'll get left behind. You won't be relevant anymore. So if you need to speak the language of finance, go for it. And then you also need to layer the additional languages that matter as well on top. So we have final minute warning. Anybody want to share anything before we say thank you to everyone for participating and listening?
I would just say thank you to everyone. I've made so many notes through this call and already pinged some people about getting stats on our website because I think it's just a great idea.
Yeah, the same. Tara and Mike, I've literally been making so many notes, so thank you so much as well.
Same. Thank you so much for introducing me further into an industry I've only been in proximity to more. So now I can actually have more to talk about at dinner, but also just understanding that your industry is very similar to all of ours. Like, we're all in this together, and the more we create community, the better outcome we're going to have. We can facilitate dialogue and learn from each other. That's the most important thing.
Thank you all for sharing your ideas, your expertise, and your guidance. Really appreciate it. This is how we make progress and move things forward. Thank you again to James and the Nexus community for providing the space for this conversation. And with that, we're done.
All right, friends, thanks for listening to this episode of the Nexus podcast. For more episodes like this and to get the weekly Nexus newsletter, which, by the way, readers have said is the best way to stay up to date on the future of the smart buildings industry, please subscribe at nexuslabs.online. You can find the show notes for this conversation there as well. Have a great day.